The email arrived at 2:14 p.m. on a Tuesday, which is prime time for the apex predator of the suburban savanna. It's when they've had their sensible lunch, finished their power walk, and have a solid 4-hour window to patrol their territory for violations before preheating the oven for a sensible dinner. The sender, as always, was Brenda Wexler, President for Life of the Eagles Crest Homeowners Association. The subject line was a masterpiece of the form. Subject: unsanctioned auditory disturbance. Ref: covenant. 7b, subsection atmospheric serenity. Not noise complaint. Not hey, can you keep it down? Brenda speaks a dialect of legalese and passive aggression that hasn't been formally recognized by linguists, but is fluent in every HOA across America. I swear, they must hand out a thesaurus of misery when you get elected to the board. Atmospheric serenity. You'd think I was operating a black market fireworks factory, not a small CNC machine carving a detail into a piece of mahogany. I looked at the machine in question. Its high-pitched whir, the only sound in my garage, besides the gentle hum of the beer fridge. On its cutting bed was a wooden tiki head, maybe a foot tall. Its expression was one of surprised delight, which was roughly the opposite of my own. According to Brenda, the sound of creation was a Class C felony against the neighborhood's approved soundscape, which as far as I could tell consisted of lawnmowers on Saturday morning and the distant, mournful cry of a golden retriever who's realized he's trapped in the same beige nightmare as the rest of us. My garage is my sanctuary. It's the one place that hasn't been painted agreeable greige or Swiss coffee. The two colors approved for interior walls in Eagles Crest. It's obsessively organized, pegboards lined with tools that all have their own neat little Sharpie outlines, but it's a creative chaos. There are spools of 3D printer filament in every color imaginable, half-finished woodworking projects, and a schematic for a self-watering herb garden that I'm pretty sure violates at least 3 bylaws regarding non-approved irrigation systems. I work a remote tech job, which means I have a dangerous amount of time to think, to tinker, to build. And in a place like Eagles Crest, building anything interesting is an act of rebellion. I was in the middle of drafting a suitably sarcastic reply, something about my art being a protest against the crushing conformity of modern suburban life, CCing the ghost of Andy Warhol, when a shadow fell across the driveway. I didn't have to look up. It was the shadow of a woman with a perfectly maintained bob, sensible walking shoes, and a clipboard that she wielded with the authority of a scepter. Brenda Wexler. She didn't step onto my property. She never did. She stood on the public sidewalk, a silent, judging sentinel of mediocrity. "Jacob," she said. Her voice was calm, but it carried the chilling weight of someone who enjoys telling other people what to do just a little too much. "Brenda." I didn't look up from the tiki head I was now pretending to inspect with intense focus. "Let me guess. You received a report." "We did," she said, as if there was a we involved. Brenda was the legislative, judicial, and executive branches of the HOA, all rolled into one. A high-frequency whine, inconsistent with the community's ambient noise profile. My pursuit of a hobby is disrupting the silent majesty of a Tuesday afternoon? Forgive me. I'll try to carve my wood more quietly next time. She made a little tisk sound. "It's about being considerate, Jacob. It's about being part of a community." She made a neat little check mark on a sheet on her clipboard. Her eyes, cold and assessing, scanned past me, toward the back of the neighborhood. "Furthermore, I saw you near the drainage culvert by the South Retention Pond yesterday evening." I finally looked at her. My heart gave a little thump. "I was admiring the structural integrity of precast concrete, Brenda. It's a passion of mine. Is that in the bylaws?" Her lips formed a thin, unsettling smile. It didn't reach her eyes. "That is community property, Jacob. It's for water management, not for whatever it is you do." She paused, letting the implication hang in the air. "Just remember, all community infrastructure is for the community's benefit, and I decide what that benefit is." She made one more note on her clipboard, turned with a crisp pivot of her walking shoe, and strode away. I watched her go, a prickle of unease crawling up my spine. "That's not a threat," I muttered to the tiki head. "That's a mission statement." But I dismissed it. What was the worst she could do? Send me another email? Fine me $25? I had bigger things to worry about. Or, more accurately, I had a secret, wonderful thing to get back to. And Brenda Wexler wasn't invited. Night in Eagle's Crest falls with a soft, uniform click. Porch lights, all of them the same warm white LED bulb, snap on in unison. The drone of televisions tuned to the evening news hums behind identical facades. It's the perfect time to disappear. I waited until the last dog walker had passed, then slipped out my back door. My house backs up to a narrow green belt, a strip of manicured grass and strategically placed trees that separates our section from the next. At the far end, tucked behind a thick, overgrown thicket of bougainvillea that the HOA landscaping crew always seemed to miss, was my destination. It was a concrete head wall, stained with years of rain, and in its center was the mouth of a circular pipe, 8 feet in diameter. Covering the opening was a heavy, rusted metal grate. To any casual observer, it looked like a standard storm drain, but I knew better. With a quick glance over my shoulder, I knelt down. My fingers found the hidden latch I'd spent 2 weekends fabricating. A quiet snick, and a section of the grate swung inwards on silent, well-oiled hinges. I slipped inside, pulling the grate closed behind me. It locked with a satisfying clunk. I flicked on my headlamp. The beam cut a sharp cone through the pitch black, revealing a damp, echoing concrete tube. The air was cool and smelled of wet earth and limestone. I walked about 50 feet, my footsteps the only sound, until I reached a slight bend in the pipe. And then I flipped a switch. The space bloomed with a warm, golden light that banished the oppressive dark. This was it. This was my place, my rebellion, my masterpiece. I called it the Grotto. I had transformed a 40-foot section of this abandoned overflow spillway into a sanctuary. A raised deck, built from marine-grade plywood and sealed with 3 coats of epoxy, ran along the floor, keeping everything up out of the perpetual dampness. On it sat a small, comfortable couch I'd bought off Craigslist and painstakingly disassembled to get through the grate. Shelves, cunningly fitted to the curve of the pipe, held a small library of paperbacks, a chess set, and a collection of vintage sci-fi magazines. Built into a recess in the concrete wall was a fully stocked bar. Not just a couple of beers, but good stuff. Single malt scotch, small batch bourbon, a bottle of gin for the rare occasion I felt civilized. The tiki head I'd been carving earlier was mounted above it, its eyes now glowing softly thanks to the custom LED fixture I'd just finished. Power came from a bank of deep-cycle marine batteries tucked under the deck, which were trickle-charged by a solar panel I'd cleverly disguised as a modern art birdbath in my backyard. A small, silent projector was mounted to the ceiling, aimed at a section of the pipe I had sanded and painted with high-grade screen paint. I took a deep breath, the air here feeling cleaner, purer, than the recycled air of my own house. This was the only place in a 5-mile radius that Brenda's clipboard couldn't reach. It was a monument to the spirit of the law, not the letter. The pipe was abandoned. It wasn't on any recent county plans. It was a forgotten piece of infrastructure, a dead end. And I'd given it a new life, my life. I poured myself a generous measure of bourbon, the ice clinking in the glass. I sank into the couch, put my feet up, and just admired my work. The low, warm light, the gentle, almost imperceptible drip of condensation somewhere down the pipe, the complete and total solitude. Here there were no rules about the color of your mailbox or the height of your grass. Here I could just be. I was about to fire up the projector and watch an old film noir when I heard it. It wasn't a drip. It wasn't the scuttling of some pipe-dwelling creature. It was a sound that didn't belong. A deep, groaning, metallic screech that echoed through the concrete tube, seeming to come from everywhere at once. It was the sound of immense, ancient machinery being forced to move after a long, long slumber. I froze, glass halfway to my lips. My blood ran cold. I knew every sound in this pipe, every echo, every resonance. This was new, and it sounded final. No, she wouldn't. The thought was immediate, instinctual. She couldn't. It's a 3-foot wide cast-iron wheel that probably hasn't been turned since the Nixon administration. It would take the strength of a silverback gorilla. Or... My own internal monologue finished the thought with chilling clarity, or the righteous fury of a woman who just discovered your trash cans are 2 inches too far to the left. Brenda, standing by the culvert. I saw you. The valve. The big red wheel of "Don't Touch" that rose out of the ground 100 yards upstream, the one she'd seen me near. Panic, sharp and electric, shot through me. I scrambled off the couch, sloshing bourbon onto the deck. I had to get to the entrance. But even as I started, I heard a new sound. A hiss. A trickle. It wasn't coming from the entrance grate 50 feet away. It was coming from the pipe itself, from the seams in the concrete around me. My waterproofing was good, designed to handle the ambient dampness and the occasional trickle of storm runoff. It was not designed to handle active, sustained pressure. A small stream of water, dark and cold, began to weep from a joint just above the bar. Then another, and another. The water wasn't flowing in from the outside world. It was being forced out from the main line. The valve she'd closed was upstream, between me and the retention pond. The water from the massive Finch Reservoir, which this pipe was a forgotten overflow for, was now backing up. And my perfect, secret grotto was at the lowest point in the line. The trickles became steady streams. Water began to pool on the deck, shimmering in the warm light. The projector flickered and died with a pop as a connection shorted out. "Oh, you have got to be kidding me," I whispered. But my voice was lost in the growing sound of water. The water was rising. Fast. The entrance was too far, and the current would soon be too strong. The only way out was forward. Deeper into the darkness of the spillway, away from the grate, pushed by the rising tide of Brenda Wexler's petty vengeance. I grabbed the small emergency go bag I kept under the bar, a waterproof pouch containing a powerful flashlight, a multi-tool, and some energy bars. The water was over my ankles now, cold and shocking. It swirled around the legs of my couch. I turned for one last look at my sanctuary. The last thing I saw was the soft, friendly glow in the tiki head's eyes before it was swallowed by the murky, rising water, plunging me into absolute darkness. While I was being initiated into the world's least fun water park ride, a different kind of drama was unfolding up on the surface. Of course, I didn't know any of this at the time. I was a little busy trying not to drown. I pieced it all together later from police reports and the testimony of one very tired, very salty contractor. The scene opens at the spillway valve. It's a massive wagon wheel-sized valve, painted a faded, angry red, rising out of a concrete slab in the ground and surrounded by a chain-link fence. A sign on the fence reads, "Property of Finch County Water District. No trespassing." The gate to the fence, usually secured with a rusty, ancient lock, now sported a brand new, heavy-duty padlock. Standing beside it, looking immensely pleased with herself, was Brenda Wexler, her cell phone pressed to her ear. 2 police cruisers crunched to a stop on the gravel access road. Out stepped Officer Ramirez and Officer Gable. Ramirez was in his 50s, with a mustache that had seen more tragedy and absurdity than most people see in 10 lifetimes. His sigh was a permanent fixture of his personality. Gable was his opposite. Young, earnest, with a haircut so sharp you could probably use it to level a picture frame. Brenda flagged them down, her face a mask of civic-minded concern. "Officers, thank you for the prompt response," she said, as if she'd just single-handedly thwarted a terrorist plot. "I've neutralized the threat." Ramirez's sigh was audible from 10 feet away. "Ma'am, what threat would that be?" "The auditory disturbances," Brenda said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "The suspicious loitering around sensitive community infrastructure. I saw no other option but to take decisive action. I secured the spillway." Gable, the by-the-book rookie, walked over to the fence and peered at the giant red wheel. "Ma'am, this is municipal infrastructure. Did you turn that wheel?" "I restored order," Brenda said, puffing out her chest slightly. "It's my duty as president." "Your duty does not involve operating heavy machinery owned by the county water district," Ramirez cut in, his voice flat and devoid of patience. He'd seen 1,000 Brendas in his career. "Do you have any idea what this pipe even does?" "It's for drainage," she said vaguely, waving a dismissive hand. Ramirez's eyes narrowed. He noticed my old pickup truck parked on the side of the access road, right where I'd left it. He and Gable exchanged a look. They walked over to the culvert entrance, the one hidden by the bougainvillea. Gable, being younger and more flexible, knelt and peered through the grate with his flashlight. He was quiet for a long moment. Ramirez?" he said, his voice suddenly tight. "You should see this." Ramirez crouched down beside him. The beam of his own flashlight cut through the darkness, illuminating the modified, now ajar grate. It glinted off the surface of dark, still water that had filled the pipe almost to the top. "There's a lot of water in there," Gable said, "and it looks like someone was living in it. There's furniture in there." The situation escalated instantly. It was no longer a crank call from a power-tripping HOA president. It was a potential missing person case, a possible drowning. Ramirez stood up, looked at my truck, then back at Brenda, whose smug expression was beginning to falter as she realized she was no longer in control. "Ma'am," Ramirez said, his voice dangerously low, "you're going to need to stay right here." An hour later, as the sun began to dip below the perfectly uniform rooflines of Eagle's Crest, another vehicle arrived. It was a battered Ford F-250 with the logo "Salty Sal's Contracting and General Problem Solving" peeling off the side. Out climbed a man who was the physical embodiment of his truck. Salty Sal was in his 60s, with a formidable beer belly, a coffee-stained shirt, and the profoundly weary aura of a man who has spent 40 years fixing problems caused by idiots. He took one look at the giant red valve, one look at the 2 cops, and one long, appraising look at Brenda, who stood with her arms crossed, radiating indignation. Sal let out a low whistle and walked over to Ramirez. "Let me guess," he said, not even bothering with a hello. "The lady with the clipboard turned the big red wheel." Ramirez just nodded. "She neutralized a threat." Sal pinched the bridge of his nose, a gesture of almost spiritual exhaustion. He turned to Brenda. "Lady, people in my line of work, we have entire 6-hour safety seminars about not touching the big red wheel. Do you have any idea what you've done?" I am perfectly within my rights as an elected official of this community to protect our assets, Brenda snapped. You're perfectly within your rights to cause a catastrophic infrastructure failure, Sal shot back, his voice a gravelly rumble. This ain't just for drainage. This is the emergency overflow for the Finch Reservoir. You don't just close it. It's like putting a cork in a goddamn fire hydrant. That pressure? It's got to go somewhere. You've probably got hairline fractures and compromised seals all the way down this line now. He gestured with his thumb toward the culvert. And if there was a guy in there, well, he ain't in there anymore. He's been flushed. Flushed where? Gable asked. Sal shook his head. This is an old line, decommissioned mostly. It dumps out into the deepest part of the reservoir itself. The part on the other side of the ridge. He looked at the cops. The part that's on private property, billionaire property. The realization dawned on Ramirez and Gable's faces. This was no longer just a missing person case, or a case of property damage. They couldn't just open the valve now. That would cause a dangerous pressure surge. They couldn't send a diver into an unstable pipe. And the potential victim, or body, was now located in a massive, private, underground lake owned by the most reclusive and eccentric tech billionaire in the state, Alistair Finch. The paperwork, Ramirez thought, was going to be a nightmare of biblical proportions. Meanwhile, I was living the nightmare. The journey through the pipe was a chaotic, terrifying blur. Imagine being sealed in an oil drum and kicked down a mountain. Now fill that oil drum with cold, murky water and you're getting close. The current was immense, a relentless, driving force that gave me no control. I was a human piece of lint being flushed through the plumbing of the gods. My headlamp, miraculously still attached to my head, cut a frantic, useless beam that only illuminated the concrete rushing past me. I slammed into the sides of the pipe, my shoulder taking a brutal impact, then my hip. I tumbled end over end, completely disoriented, the water a roaring chaos in my ears. Air was the only currency that mattered, and I was going bankrupt fast. I'd managed to gasp a lungful before being completely submerged, but it wasn't going to last. My internal monologue, my constant sarcastic companion, was screaming. Okay, checklist. 1. Currently being flushed down a tube like a forgotten goldfish. 2. The last thing I ate was a stale protein bar, which feels like a real shame for a last meal. Should have had the pizza. 3. My DIY speakeasy. The only good thing in my life is now an artificial reef for whatever blind, mutated things live in this pipe. When they write my obituary, I hope they mention the craftsmanship. Cause of death? Homeowners Association. Just as my lungs began to burn with an agony that promised unconsciousness, I saw it. A change in the darkness ahead. Not a light, exactly, but a dilution of the black. A faint, diffused greenish glow. The pipe seemed to widen, the pressure around me lessening for a fraction of a second before a final, massive whoosh of force ejected me from the end of the pipe like a champagne cork. I shot through the water, tumbling, before my natural buoyancy took over and I rocketed towards the surface. I broke through with a desperate, ragged gasp, sucking in air that was cool, damp, and blessedly breathable. I coughed, spitting out a mouthful of what tasted like ancient history. When my vision cleared, my jaw went slack. I was in a body of water so vast I couldn't see the other side. It wasn't a lake, it was an inland sea, and there was no sky. Above me, hundreds of feet up, was a cavern ceiling, a colossal dome of rock from which hung strange, glowing fungi, casting an ethereal, pale green light over the entire impossible space. I was underground. I had been flushed into the hollow heart of the earth. I treaded water, my mind struggling to process the sheer scale of it all. I was a tiny speck in an immense, silent world. But it wasn't silent for long. In the distance, I saw a light. Not the dim glow of fungus, but a steady, focused beam, moving silently and purposefully through the water. It was coming towards me. It got closer, and my exhausted, waterlogged brain finally identified the shape. It was a submersible, a sleek, black, futuristic-looking machine, the size of a large van, gliding towards me without a sound. It stopped about 20 feet away, its single, powerful spotlight pinning me like a bug on a board. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, a voice, amplified and oddly robotic, echoed across the water. "You're not on the schedule." I blinked, water streaming down my face. "Funny," I yelled back, my voice hoarse. "I don't remember putting Get Flushed into a Bond villain's secret lair on my calendar either." I was exhausted, terrified, and starting to get very cold. "Can I come in? I think a fish is nibbling on my pants." There was a slight pause. Then the hatch on top of the sub opened with a hydraulic hiss. A woman in a practical dark gray jumpsuit stood silhouetted against the light from within. Her face was impassive. "The fish are sterile," the voice, now clearly hers and no longer amplified, said with deadpan seriousness. "And vegetarian. Get on the ladder." I swam the last few feet, my limbs feeling like lead, and hauled my sorry self up a small ladder and onto the deck of the sub. The woman, who looked to be about my age with sharp features and an air of professional boredom, watched me without a flicker of emotion. This was Ava. I stumbled into the pristine interior, dripping water all over a minimalist control panel and what looked like white leather seats. She didn't offer me a towel. She just sealed the hatch, and with a soft hum, the submersible began to move. "So," I said, shivering, "where are we? What is this place? Is this a government thing? Area 52? Am I going to be dissected?" Ava didn't even look at me. Her hands moved expertly over the controls. "This is the Finch Proving Ground. We test proprietary submersible technology here." She glanced at me sideways. "And no, Mr. Finch finds dissection to be terribly inefficient." The name clicked into place, pushing through the fog of adrenaline and hypothermia. "Mr. Finch, as in Alistair Finch? The guy who tried to launch a private space station powered by artisanal coffee beans?" A corner of her mouth twitched. It might have been a smile. "That project is on hold. The emissions weren't fair trade compliant." She gestured to a seat. "Now please, sit still. You're dripping on the pressure-sensitive upholstery." I sat, my mind reeling. My day had started with a noise complaint about a tiki head. It was ending in a secret underground lake, in a billionaire's private submarine, being chauffeured by a woman who probably thought emotions were a design flaw. The sub glided through the silent, green-lit water, and my eyes widened as our destination came into view. Built into the cavern wall was a massive underwater structure, a multi-leveled base glowing with internal lights, like a sunken city from a sci-fi epic. Docks, observation windows, and airlocks were visible through the crystal-clear water. I just stared, my brain officially broken. Brenda Wexler wanted to control the color of my mailbox. Alistair Finch had built Atlantis in his basement. We were not playing the same game. Ava docked the submersible with a silence and precision that was genuinely unnerving. The airlock hissed open, and we walked into the base. The air was warm and dry, a shocking contrast to the cold, damp cavern. Ava finally handed me a towel so thick and plush I think it might have been woven from the clouds themselves. She led me through a series of sterile white corridors that hummed with quiet efficiency, until we reached a pair of large, brushed steel doors. They slid open to reveal the main observation deck. And what a deck it was! It was less a room and more a theater for the deep. One entire wall was a single, colossal pane of glass, or what I assumed was glass, It was probably some kind of transparent unobtainium, looking out into the majestic green-lit expanse of the lake. Schools of strange bioluminescent fish, like living constellations, drifted lazily past. The furniture was sparse, elegant, and looked ruinously expensive. Standing in the middle of the room, looking out the window, was a single man. He was wearing a ridiculously comfortable-looking robe of emerald green silk and holding a delicate teacup. He turned as we entered, and a warm, curious smile spread across his face. This was Alistair Finch. He wasn't angry or alarmed or even surprised. He looked delighted. "Mr. Miller!" he exclaimed, his voice full of genuine cheer. "Welcome. Forgive the informal attire, but you've arrived a little outside of business hours. You, my friend, are the first unscheduled variable this facility has encountered in 7 years. It's magnificent. How on earth did you do it?" I clutched the heavenly towel around my shivering body. "Less of a how and more of a was done to me," I managed, my teeth chattering, "by a woman named Brenda and a very large, very red wheel." Finch's eyes lit up with an almost manic glee. "Brenda," he said, savoring the name. "Tell me everything." And so I did. While Ava stood silently by the door, occasionally glancing at the puddle I was making on the polished concrete floor, I explained the whole sordid tale. The beige tyranny of Eagle's Crest, the endless petty rules, Brenda and her clipboard of doom, my secret grotto, my one act of defiance, the complaint about the tiki head, the confrontation, the ominous threat, the groaning wheel, the flood. Finch listened with the rapt attention of a child hearing a bedtime story. He nodded, he paced, he steepled his fingers. He didn't interrupt once until I got to the part about being flushed out into his lake. "Incredible!" he burst out, clapping his hands together. "She repurposed municipal infrastructure to settle a personal vendetta. The sheer audacity, the bureaucratic violence. Ava, are you getting this? This isn't a security breach. This is a masterpiece of suburban warfare." "I'm glad my near-death experience is entertaining," I said, starting to feel a little more human as the warmth of the room seeped into my bones. "Now what? Do you call the cops? Hand me over to the feds in a black bag?" Finch laughed, a rich, genuine sound that echoed in the vast room. "Hand you over? Mr. Miller? May I call you Jake? We don't hand people like you over. You fought the system. You built something beautiful and weird in a place no one thought to look. You stared into the beige abyss and said, 'I think I'll install a tiki bar.' You're one of us." He beamed at me. "We are not handing you over. We are going to make an entrance." My confusion must have been written all over my face. "Jake," he said, leaning in conspiratorially. "Revenge is a dish best served cold, yes. But pettiness? Pettiness is a dish best served with theatricality, overwhelming technological superiority, and public humiliation." He strode over to a wall that looked like plain concrete, tapped it twice, and it shimmered into a massive, high-resolution display showing schematics of the surrounding area. "Eva, bring up the Eagle's Crest overlay, specifically Service Conduit 7. A new schematic appeared, showing the layout of my neighborhood. Finch pointed a dramatic finger at a smaller wall, blue shape in the center of a patch of green. "There," he said, his voice buzzing with creative energy. "The Eagle's Crest Ornamental Lake, a disgusting chemically treated puddle they probably call a water feature. And according to these original county blueprints from the 70s, Service Conduit 7, a small, forgotten maintenance channel, surfaces right in the middle of it, right next to the community gazebo." He turned to me, his eyes sparkling with mischief. "They think you're gone, Jake. A tragic victim of your own rogue behavior, mourned for approximately 5 minutes before they start arguing about who gets your parking spot. We will disabuse them of this notion, not with a phone call, not with a lawyer, but with a spectacle. He zoomed in on the image of the lake. Brenda is hosting the annual community picnic and barbecue there this Saturday. It's the crowning jewel of her reign. We are going to surface my flagship personal submersible, the Nautilus 2.0, right in the middle of her pathetic little party. I stared at him, then at the screen. A slow, malicious, and deeply satisfying grin spread across my face. This was better than any complaint I could ever file with the county. This was better than suing the HOA. This was revenge on a scale I couldn't have possibly dreamed of. "I'm in," I said, my voice firm, "but I have one condition." Finch raised an eyebrow. "Name it." "I get to say one line to Brenda, and I want to be wearing something cool." Finch snapped his fingers, a sharp crack in the quiet room. "Ava, get this man a jumpsuit and find out his shoe size." The eagle's crest. Annual community picnic and barbecue was the pinnacle of enforced fun. Matching red and white checkered tablecloths were stretched over every picnic table. A sad-looking bounce house, slightly deflated on one side, listed near the swing sets. The air smelled of cheap charcoal and simmering resentment. And at the center of it all, standing at a podium next to the community gazebo, was Brenda Wexler. She was in her element. She had managed to spin the story of my disappearance into a heroic tragedy of which she was the Cassandra-like protagonist. "And while it is a profound tragedy," she said into the crackling microphone, her voice dripping with faux sympathy, "it is also a solemn lesson in community standards, a lesson that some rules are not mere suggestions. They are there to protect us, even from ourselves." A few people in the small crowd nodded sagely, munching on their hot dogs. Up on the surface, Officer Ramirez and Officer Gable stood by their cruiser, providing crowd control for the 60 or so residents, looking like they'd rather be anywhere else. Salty Sal, the contractor, was even there, having been strong-armed by the county into doing a preliminary survey of the destabilized area. He was leaning against a tree, smoking a cigarette, and looking thoroughly disgusted with the entire world. Just as Brenda was about to launch into a diatribe about the importance of timely lawn aeration, a disturbance started in the center of the placid, unnaturally blue ornamental lake. At first, it was just a few bubbles. A man in a pastel polo shirt pointed. "Hey, looks like they finally fixed the aerator." But the bubbling grew more intense, turning the center of the lake into a churning, frothing cauldron. The crowd murmured, people lowering their paper plates to stare. This was not normal. Then, with the silent, unstoppable majesty of a cinematic leviathan, the sleek, black hull of the Nautilus 2.0 breached the surface. Water cascaded off its carbon fiber hide in shimmering sheets. It was 20 feet long, impossibly futuristic, and completely silent. The entire picnic ground to a dead halt. A kid dropped his hot dog into the dirt. A woman's Pomeranian started yapping hysterically. Brenda stood at the podium, her mouth hanging open, the microphone forgotten in her hand. With a soft hydraulic hiss, the main hatch on top of the submersible swung open. And there I stood, bathed in the glorious afternoon sun. I wasn't the shivering, waterlogged wretch who had been flushed out of a pipe. I was wearing a form-fitting, dark gray jumpsuit with a discreet, tasteful Finch Industries logo on the chest. Next to me, Alistair Finch, now dressed in a sharp blazer, gave a casual, friendly wave to the stunned crowd. Across the lawn, I locked eyes with Brenda. Her face went through a spectacular series of transformations, from smug self-satisfaction to confusion to disbelief to pale horror, and finally to a deep, blotchy crimson. Ramirez and Gable just stared, their jaws slack. Salty Sal took a long drag from his cigarette, a slow smile spreading across his weary face as he shook his head in disbelief. I raised a small, built-in comms unit on my jumpsuit's wrist to my mouth. My voice, clear and amplified, boomed across the silent park, echoing off the identical houses. "Brenda, you messed with the wrong plumber!" For a beat, there was absolute silence. Then chaos. The crowd erupted into a cacophony of shouts and gasps. The one local news reporter who had been sniffing around the missing man story started screaming into her phone. Brenda just stood there, speechless, pointing a trembling, accusatory finger that had suddenly lost all its authority. The aftermath was even better than the entrance. Brenda Wexler, faced with 2 cops, a county contractor, a billionaire, and a very much alive victim who showed up in a submarine, didn't stand a chance. She was charged with reckless endangerment, malicious destruction of municipal property, and filing a false police report. The HOA board, staring down the barrel of a lawsuit from Finch's army of lawyers that would have bankrupted their little fiefdom for the next century, forced her to resign in disgrace. She sold her house a month later. I became a minor local legend. "Submarine Man," the papers called me. I did one glorious interview where I told the entire story, from the tiki head to the jumpsuit, then retreated from the limelight. Finch was true to his word. He legally purchased the drainage easement from the county. He hired Salty Sal's company, at a rate that made Sal weep with joy, to not just repair the pipe, but to transform it. The Grotto 2.0 was no longer a DIY project. It was an underground work of art, a reinforced, permitted, climate-controlled lounge with a secret entrance through a false wall in my garage. Months later, I was sitting in the new grotto. The concrete walls were polished smooth. The deck was rich, dark teak. A state-of-the-art sound system played soft jazz. I was sharing a bottle of 25-year-old scotch with Alistair Finch. "You know, the media got the story all wrong," Finch said, swirling the amber liquid in his glass. "They think it's about one man fighting his HOA." "What's it really about?" I asked, taking a sip. The scotch was smoky, complex, and tasted like victory. Finch smiled. "It's about the fundamental human right to build cool stuff in secret, a principle upon which this nation was founded." He raised his glass. "Cheers to that." We clinked glasses. At that exact moment, my phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out. It was an email notification from the new HOA president, a nervous-looking man named Gary. Subject: Community Alert. Water Feature Regulations. Dear residents, please be advised that the mooring of private, non-approved watercraft, including but not limited to personal submersibles, is strictly prohibited in the ornamental lake under Bylaw 11C. I showed the phone to Finch. He read it, and a slow chuckle rumbled in his chest. Then he threw his head back and roared with laughter. I joined him, the sound echoing through our perfect, secret, and now fully permitted sanctuary. I took another sip of scotch, perfectly, blissfully content. I had won.